Committee of Transportation Infrastructure and Subcommittee of Water Resource and Environment will come to order. Welcome. First, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping here. I ask unanimous consent to allow Congressman Farrenhold to participate in today's committee hearing. With no objection, so ordered. Also, I ask unanimous consent that the hearing record be kept open for 30 days after this hearing in order to accept other submissions of written testimony for the hearing record. No objection. Without objection, so ordered. Today we're here to review the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Chiefs reports and post-authorization change reports. And we have General Peabody as our guest, and I'll yield to myself first for an opening statement. First of all, welcome again, and we're holding this hearing, the Chiefs report, and the process the Corps undertakes to develop these water resource development projects and some of the steps the Corps is carrying out internally to accelerate the process. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is the federal government's largest water resources development and management agency. The Corps began its water resources program in the 1800s when Congress for the first time appropriated money for improving river navigation. Today, the Corps of Engineers constructs projects for the purpose of navigation, flood control, beach erosion control and shoreline protection, hydroelectric power, recreation, water supply, environmental protection, restoration and enhancement, and fish and wildlife mitigation. The Corps of Engineers planning process considers economic development and environmental needs as it addresses water resource challenges. The planning process addresses the nation's water resources needs in a system, context, and explores a full range of alternatives in developing solutions that meet both national and local needs. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is subject to all federal statutes, including the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Fish and Wildlife Coordination Act, and all previous water resource development acts, flood control acts, and the Rivers and Harbors Acts. These laws and associated regulations and guidance provide the legal basis for the Corps of Engineers planning process. For instance, when carrying out a feasibility study, the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, requires the Corps of Engineers to include an identification of significant environmental resources likely to be impacted by the proposed project, an assessment of the impacts, a full disclosure of likely impacts, and a consideration of a full range of alternatives, including a no-action alternative and an action by other alternatives. NEPA also requires a 30-day public review of any draft document and a 30-day public review of any final document produced by the Corps of Engineers. Additionally, when carrying out a feasibility study, the Clean Water Act requires an evaluation of the potential impacts of a proposed project or action and requires a letter from a state agency ensuring proposed project or action complies with state water quality standards. The Army Corps of Engineers also has to formulate alternative plans to ensure all reasonable alternatives are evaluated, including plans that maximize net national economic development benefits and other plans that incorporate other federal, state, and local concerns. Mitigation of adverse impacts to be included in each of the alternative plans are reviewed in the study. The Corps of Engineers also is responsible for identifying areas of risk and uncertainty in the study so decisions can be made with some degree of reliability on the estimated costs and benefits of the alternative plan. These planning efforts do not take place in a back room somewhere. They are public meetings as well as interagency meetings involving local, state, and other federal agencies. Typically, a plan recommended by the Corps of Engineers is a plan with the greatest net economic benefit and consistent with protection of the nation's environment. However, the Corps does not have the discretion to recommend another alternative, does have the discretion to recommend another alternative. There are overriding reasons recommending another plan based on federal, state, or local concerns. By now, many of us have seen the actual size of typical studies carried out by the Corps of Engineers. While these are complex projects that need to be reviewed by the public and other state federal agencies, the level of analysis required by their laws and regulations are crippling the project delivery process. We are literally studying infrastructure projects to death, but it is not solely the fault of the Corps of Engineers. Congress needs to change the way the Corps of Engineers carries out its business. It is no longer acceptable that these studies take dozens of years to complete. Ultimately, the federal taxpayer is on the hook for these studies and for the length of time it takes to carry them out, delaying the benefits of these projects on ultimately supposedly to provide. As we have constructed a Policy-Heavy Water Resources Development Act, WRDA, Both the House and Senate conferees are focused on accelerating the study and project delivery process, as well as better prioritizing these worthwhile investments that the American public has relied on in the past decade, for decades. And I'm interested to hear General Peabody's testimony on what the process they're doing to streamline and expedite the process to get these projects going, because we all know time is money, and we're falling behind in our global competitiveness by not having their infrastructure where it needs to be. So this time, I yield to my ranking member, Mr. Bishop from New York, for any comments you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you and Committee Chairman Schuster for holding this hearing on outstanding Chiefs reports and 902 project budget increases. This hearing is a critical step towards closure and completion of the conference report and final bill language for the long-awaited Water Resources Reform and Development Act. This hearing provides Congress the ability to perform one of our most important roles: oversight and review of the Army Corps of Engineer programs and authorization of specific projects. Before I begin my statement, I'd like to welcome General Peabody here this morning's hearing. Thank you, sir, for your service and attention to the water engineering needs of our country, and most importantly, for assisting the Northeast coastal states as we recover from Hurricane Sandy. Thank you very much, sir. With the passage of H.R. 3080, the Water Resources Reform Act, in October of last year, we authorized 23 Chiefs reports that have been submitted to Congress by the Corps of Engineers. These Chiefs reports have been completed after the last WRDA bill was passed in 2007. Since the passage of WRDA in October 2013, 11 new Chiefs reports have been transmitted to our committee. These 11 Chiefs reports are the focus of this hearing. In addition to these Chiefs reports, we are also evaluating requests from the Corps to authorize an increase in cost of 8 other projects. Collectively, this group of projects should be included in the WRDA 2014 conference report and hopefully subject to approval in both the House and the Senate within the next few weeks. Our responsibility in this subcommittee and as members of Congress is to represent the public in the review and direction of what the Army Corps of Engineers accomplishes. If we fail to execute proper oversight, 2 things happen. 1, the administration ends up prioritizing projects and making decisions based on their set of metrics. Those metrics may or may not be the same ones that are important to members of Congress. 2, the process of authorizing and moving projects from design to planning to construction becomes more time-consuming, complicated, and costly. By authorizing these 11 Chiefs reports, along with those already captured in H.R. 3080, combined with Section 902 changes for a limited number of ongoing projects, we will support what this country needs most right now: the creation and retention of real jobs and wages that will help lift our economy. Real jobs for Americans means a stronger nation. We too often take for granted our water infrastructure and inland water highways and harbors. It is easy to forget about the vital work the Army Corps of Engineers has done over the years to protect our communities, beaches, rivers, and coastlines. In the heat of debate, it is also easy to lose sight of the importance that these projects have in employing millions of people across this great nation. In my opinion, the process we have embraced with this WRDA bill reflects what we have been sent here to do: to legislate, cooperatively, and collectively do what is right for the country. We may disagree over how the administration manages the Army Corps and how the Corps then performs its job. What we can agree on is that without a commitment to sustain, maintain, and continually develop our engineering and project capacity, we will be wasting the investment that those before us have made. So once again, let us do our due diligence here today. Authorize these projects and get WRDA across the finish line. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
At this time, Chairman of the full Transportation Infrastructure Committee, Chairman Bill Schuster from Pennsylvania.
I thank the gentleman. Congress is prepared, I should say, to re-engage in the development of our water resources and our infrastructure, to carry out that role, to prioritize the projects and activities carried out by the Corps of Engineers. Historically, as I think many in this room know, water resource legislation has been enacted every 2 years to provide the oversight and the policy direction that the Corps of Engineers and to authorize the need of the projects and improvements. But since such a measure has not been passed since 2007, Congress has been silent on the needed reforms and has failed to take action to develop, maintain, support our nation's vital water infrastructure needs. One of our top priorities is the development of our Water Resources Reform and Development Act. The legislation in the House and in our work in the conference has been the importance of strengthening oversight, transparency, and accountability. Over the last year and a half, this committee has held numerous public educational forums, roundtables, and hearings on the Corps of Engineers program. This process included oversight hearing on June 5, 2013 that provided members the opportunity to review the Chief's reports submitted to Congress and was an important part of the development of the House Water Bill that passed by the slim margin of 417 to 3, which I'm very proud to tout that number. Today's hearing continues our strong oversight of the Corps of Engineers and will provide members the opportunity to review the 11 Chiefs reports and 8 post-authorization change reports submitted to Congress since June 5, 2013. This oversight hearing will be extremely valuable to our working conference, which we are hopeful is very near to resolution. And once we finish this WRDA bill, it is critical to get WRDAs back on a 2-year cycle to ensure Congress has a fundamental role in the development of the Corps of Engineers projects and in the oversight of the agency. And as I've said many times, as soon as the President signs this WRDA bill, we're going to start working on the next WRDA bill for the next Congress. I want to thank Chairman Gibbs, Ranking Member Rahal, and Bishop for their hard work in this matter, and happy to say when that 417 number reflects a very bipartisan, very much bipartisan support for that bill. So I can't thank them enough for their good work, and I want to thank General Peabody for your service to the nation. If it was an easy job at running the Corps or being at the top of the Corps, we wouldn't have given it to the Army, because we know you guys can get the job done. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Recognize Ranking Member of the T&I Committee, Mr. Rahal from West Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to thank you, Chairman Schuster, Ranking Subcommittee Member Tim Bishop, for holding this hearing on the outstanding Chiefs reports and project budget increases for the Water Resources Development Act Bill of 2014. Throughout the extensive evolution of WRDA over the last year, Chairman Schuster and I have worked in a bipartisan, transparent, and collaborative manner to ensure that proper due diligence and oversight is performed by the committee. I believe that the proof of what we can do when we work together is the WRDA bill that will soon come out of conference. This WRDA bill will direct a reformed Corps of Engineer project process within the reality of refined budgets and congressional expectations. It is our intent over the next 2 weeks to complete the conference report on the combined and revised House and Senate WRDA bills, bring the bill back to the House for approval, and then to get it down to the White House to be signed into law. Our combined commitment to working together will bring jobs to America and improvements to the way the nation manages water resources and infrastructure. The hearing this morning is part of the commitment we made last year when we said that there will be no projects or programs in WRDA that have not undergone congressional review and oversight. That is our responsibility, and one we hold as critical to maintaining our role of oversight and authorization. So again, I want to thank you, Chairman Schuster and Chairman Gibbs and Ranking Member Bishop, for the collaborative manner in which we've worked together on this bill, and I do welcome Major General Peabody and thank him as well for his service to the country, and also his staff who worked to support the overall program of the Corps of Engineers. Thank you both for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep, thank you. Today we have one witness, Major General John Peabody. He's the Deputy Commanding General of the Civil and Emergency Operations of the United States Corps of Engineers. Accompanying him is Mr. Theodore Brown. He's the Chief of Planning and Policy of the United States Army Corps of Engineers. Welcome, gentlemen, and General Peabody, the floor is yours.
Is that on? Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Bishop, Chairman Schuster, Ranking Member Rahal, distinguished members of the subcommittee, I'm honored to testify on the Corps of Engineer project planning process, recent Chiefs reports, and post-authorization change reports. Joining me is Mr. Theodore Tab Brown, the Corps Chief of Planning and Policy. My full testimony includes descriptions of the 6 Chiefs reports that have completed executive branch review, 8 potential projects that have Chiefs reports still under administration review, and 8 projects with post-authorization change reports. My written testimony also includes a more in-depth discussion of Civil Works transformation and a discussion of the life cycle of a Corps Civil Works project, including the planning phase, which begins with a reconnaissance study and, if warranted, proceeds to a feasibility study that identifies a viable non-federal sponsor and makes an investment decision recommendation to Congress and the administration in the form of a Chief's report. For the last several years, the Corps has been developing a strategy to address the nation's current and future water resource needs, including the reliable performance of our infrastructure in an era of increasing fiscal pressures, shifting demographics, changing social values, and climate variability. This evolving strategy, which we've dubbed Civil Works Transformation, is currently focused on four main areas: budget development transformation, infrastructure strategy, methods of delivery, and planning modernization. I'm firmly committed to this effort to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of our Civil Works program in collaboration with sponsors, resource agencies, and national policymakers. This year, we embarked on an evaluation of this strategy with the intent of capitalizing on early lessons to make some adjustments, but I remain confident that the Civil Works transformation is the right general framework for the Corps. To date, we've made good progress. We're beginning to synchronize Corps investments with those made by other federal, state, local, and non-governmental organizations. We're using risk-informed decision-making to improve the reliability and resiliency of our infrastructure portfolio. We've sharpened our technical competence and improved organizational efficiency by developing technical centers of expertise. We've reduced the time to deliver feasibility studies with investment recommendations supported by high-quality analysis. And lastly, we continue improving our enterprise metrics and business processes focused on delivering on our commitments, enhancing communications, and driving cultural change. As one of the key elements of Civil Works transformation, planning modernization is focused on improving the delivery of high-quality studies in order to make water resource investment recommendations. All studies must comply with key principles, including clearly defined objectives, well-understood and risk-informed programming, integrated project management business processes, solid quality control, and consistent and policy-compliant communications. Four tenets guide these planning modernization efforts: people, projects, program, and process. First, people. An effective planning program must have well-trained, experienced people with the technical skills and collaborative spirit to work with stakeholders to address complex challenges by delivering innovative solutions. Investing in them is our most critical planning priority. Projects. Delivering a study outcome with a project investment recommendation is the whole purpose of the planning program. Since the passage of WRDA 2007, the Corps has completed 36 Chiefs reports with an approximate estimated total cost of nearly $28 billion. In the 3 years prior to planning modernization, which began in January of 2011, we completed 11 of those reports, 6 of which were 10 years or older, for a total net investment of $6.6 billion. Since we began planning modernization, we've completed 25 Chiefs reports, 14 of which were 10 years or older, for a total net estimated cost of $21 billion. It's clear that we have already made great progress because we've completed 2.5 times the reports with greater complexity in less than the same amount of time since WRDA 2007 in the last 3 years. Process. The planning process is a deliberate, incremental decision-making approach that assesses the full range of reasonable alternative. This process has received considerable attention with the now infamous 3x3x3 rule, prompted in part by Section 2033 of WRDA 2007. However, the key to our ability to actualize this goal lies in the SMART, standing for specific, measurable, achievable, risk-informed, and timely planning approach. And lastly, program. This tenet focuses on coherent, total study program management. A key has been to focus resources only on those studies most likely to be completed. We've achieved this by defining active and inactive study categories, reducing the total portfolio from over 650 studies to an active portfolio that we are managing of 158. By placing over 490 studies in an inactive status, which could be inactivated at some future point, and terminating 19 studies, we're able to harness our energies and deliver studies to the most likely to reach a conclusive outcome. Wrapping up, I'd like to finally add that certain provisions in the proposed WRDA bills under consideration, especially elimination of reconnaissance studies, defined fixed lengths for feasibility studies, and project permitting constraints, could unduly constrain the Corps and our partner federal agencies from exercising the same initiative that resulted in the successes we've seen in planning modernization. Mr. Chairman, thank you again for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to the committee's questions.
Thank you, General. I'll start off with some questions here. Of the 11 chiefs reports and the 8 post-authorization reports that we have here before us today that were delivered here since June of last year, it's kind of a blanket question on all of them. Has the Corps encountered any significant opposition to any of these reports? And if so, can you generally characterize the opposition?
I am not aware of any opposition to any one of those studies. In general, there are always concerns that reveal themselves during the study process, especially during the public comment period. That's why we go through the NEPA process, and we work very hard to properly address concerns through the public comment period. But I am not aware of any specific significant opposition to any of those.
My follow-up question is, as you mentioned public comments period, you know, how do you respond? It doesn't necessarily have to be a NEPA issue, but I mean just a project that's being laid out there, and let's say there's certain entities that aren't happy with the proposal that's being laid out, and maybe there's an alternative plans. How's the Corps react to those alternative ideas that might be thrown out and study that, and how do you relate back to the comments?
Sir, I would say in 2 general ways. The first is we work very hard to balance all of the expressed concerns in a proper way in the actual recommended alternative in the feasibility study that makes it through the chief's report. And the second way is we document those concerns. We address them specifically. We address how we've resolved them, or if they're not resolved, how we've addressed them in the final report.
Okay. And I guess to follow through that a little bit, independent external peer reviews, basically agreeing with the data and the models the Corps is using, you know, what's the status with that, with the independent reviews when they look at the processes? And
yes, sir. Since the passage of Word of 2007, we've executed approximately 75, I believe, independent external peer reviews for a total cost in excess of $12 million. In general, we have not found any comments that have made significant changes to our reporting. I would say, however, what this has revealed is that oftentimes we don't document our reports with sufficient clarity, so that generates a lot of the comments that we get in the independent external peer reviews. Basically, we need to train our engineers to be better masters of the English language and write in clearer fashion so that our conclusions are understandable to all audiences.
I see, because it raised more questions that didn't have all the information. Yeah.
Yes.
That's kind of typical. We get that too.
Sir.
A lot. Another thing I'd talk about, ask you a question, you know, this economic downturn we've gone through, do you feel that the projects that provide economic benefits, should they receive a higher priority than projects that might be more like environmental restoration projects that maybe don't provide that economic return? I mean, how do you balance that?
So that's kind of a judgment call, but I got to tell you, you know, growing up on Lake Erie as a kid in the 60s and going to Nickel Beach where it was littered with dying fishes, I'm very personally sensitive to making sure that we properly care for the environment. In my view, there's no need for the 2 issues to be in competition. Clearly, there's always a competition for limited resources, but both purposes are important purposes for the nation to prosecute and need to be fully considered.
Yeah, I guess one thing I've said, I'm going to make this statement so it's clear how maybe I personally feel. Obviously, I think the environment's important, and we should do what we can. But I'm concerned when I see the President's budget, there's a lot more, like, I don't know, several times more investment in restoration projects than in infrastructure projects. And I'm concerned that if we don't maybe prioritize those investments a little bit more, then we won't get the economic return, then we won't have the dollars to flow through to do the environmental stuff. So we have to find a balance there, and that's just a concern that I have, that there might be a higher priority set on the things that, you know, provide a return, but in a different way, not an economic return. So I have concerns about that. Just quickly, in 3x3x3, you know, why not 2x2x2 or 4x4x4? How did we end up at 3.33?
You know, sir, at the end of the day, we did a lot of introspection on this issue, and Mr. Brown and I actually were just talking about this yesterday. I think when it came down to it, it was our judgment that part of it was, again, the Word of 2007, kind of put those bounds out there between 2 and 4 years, $2 and $4 million. But our judgment and our experience concluded that most, not all, but most feasibility studies, especially ones that are well-bounded geographically and by purpose, could be executed in those parameters. And so far, our experience is playing that out. Now, we do have a goal of delivering some in 18 months. Not many make that. I think Cedar Rapids is one that was close to that amount of time. But most of them are much closer to the 3 years so far.
Okay, I'll follow up. That one's another round of questions, but I'll yield to Ms. Edwards, sitting in for Mr. Bishop.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and also to Chairman Schuster and our ranking members, Ray Hall and Bishop, because I think this is a really important and timely hearing, and I appreciate General Peabody, you and your staff being here this morning. Also want to just take a moment to acknowledge, I don't have a daughter, but I get a daughter for the day, Aaliyah Matthews, who's with Girl Scouts Troop in Upper Marlboro, 3255, and I'm just glad that she's here so she can see a Congress that's actually working and doing something today. I think Senator Ben Cardin and I have the honor and responsibility of representing Maryland in Congress on the authorizing committees and also on the WRDA conference committee. And so I think I share the view of our chairman and our ranking members that we will get WRDA completed in short order. And this bill takes us a really long way into doing that. For our state, and we have the belief in our state that when you invest in restoring environmental infrastructure, that actually is infrastructure investment and requires, a lot of job creation in order to do that. We happen to have the 4th longest coastline in the continental United States, the Chesapeake Bay, several of its tributaries. Through the 4th Congressional District, I think I have 3 or 4 tributaries that flow through the 4th Congressional District in Maryland. These resources provide billions of dollars in economic activity for our state, and maintaining and modernizing Maryland's waterways and its ports, including the Port of Baltimore, is essential for supporting and expanding our state's industries and economy. I want to ask you, because we have been engaged, obviously, with the modernization of the Port of Baltimore, its public terminals, its foreign and domestic cargo, which total about 9.6 million tons in 2013 and was equal to the prior year. The port's public and private terminals handled 652,000 cars in 2012, the most among all U.S. ports. And in 2013, automobiles and light truck tonnage increased 11.4% at the terminals at the Port of Baltimore. With this kind of volume, the Port of Baltimore plays a vital role in Maryland's economy and also has a significant impact on the economy of the entire East Coast and even into the Midwest, providing for good-paying jobs for Maryland's families, and it really is one of the most important economic engines in the state. On February 26, the Corps transmitted to Congress the post-authorization change report for Poplar Island in Maryland. Poplar Island is located on the Chesapeake Bay in Talbot County and is currently being rebuilt by the Corps using dredge material from the Chesapeake Bay's approach channels to Baltimore. And so I wonder, General Peabody, if you could comment for us about that project and how it's coming along, and then if you would also talk about the 3x3x3 process. Since you've been engaged in January 2011, you've really significantly reduced the number of projects that are outstanding in the process, and I think that speaks well to what will happen in the future. And then lastly, General Peabody, in this year's this year's administration fiscal year 2015 request for the Army Corps, it's about $80 million, and that's $45 million less than fiscal year 2014. Can you tell us how you'd move ahead under the Civil Works Transformation Program and prioritize where and how $80 million in investigation dollars would be allocated? I know that's a lot, but
yes,
take it away in a minute and a half.
Yes, ma'am. So Poplar Island, as you discussed, this is one of the post-authorization change reports that we've submitted for a recommended cost increase. This is really important for the Port of Baltimore, which, as you pointed out, is one of our nation's premier cargo handling ports, because the dredged material in the port needs to be placed in upland locations, and this provides not just a place to do that, but also beneficial use for some critical habitat. I forget the exact acreage, but it's a significantly large amount. It also provides an opportunity to reliably place that dredge material for a very long period of time, multiple decades. With regard to the 3x3x3 process, I think one of the challenges is, we just started this formally 2 years ago. So that means we started budgeting for it 2 years ago, which means that the 14 work plan is the first year that we're actually starting to fund studies that are 3x3x3 compliant. So we really need to get through the execution of the 3 years of those studies, and in my judgment, at least 1 and perhaps 2 years beyond that to cultivate enough lessons that we can see the trends, we can distinguish what's working and what's not working, and draw conclusions with great clarity. I will say, however, as I tried to mention in my oral statement, that so far the early indicators are, because of the number of reports that we've executed, that it's working and it's working well. With regard to your question about the budget amount, I mean, the reality is the Corps is just a very small part of the much larger federal government that has an obligation to live within fiscal constraints that we're all very well aware of in these times. And the judgment of, how much money we should get is up to policymakers such as yourselves. And what we'll do is prioritize the most important studies and all of our training programs to fit within whatever amounts that were allocated and appropriated.
Thank you very much for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, and General Peabody. Very politic answer there. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Schuster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to stay with the 3x3x3 for a minute, and can you tell us that, and you've already started doing it from the district to the division to the headquarters, consolidating those. Have you been able to determine how much time savings you've been able to squeeze out of the system when you do it, when you implement that? Has it been in process long enough to be able to?
I don't think we've got enough data or have analyzed it to the point that I can tell you with any kind of precision, sir. However, as I indicated earlier, the fact that we produced 2.5 times reports in a little less than 3 years versus the 3 years prior to starting this is a good indicator that we're executing faster. The thing you hit on, the vertical integration, to me this is perhaps the most important aspect. And it's more complex than vertical integration because it's horizontal integration with all the stakeholders and resource agencies as well. But what this allows is the people with the experience and the understanding of the policy pitfalls and challenges that most projects face to engage much earlier with the people in the field who understand the specifics of what the sponsor needs and the specifics of the project, and then hone down and focus on the alternatives that are most likely to both achieve what the sponsor desires and also be policy compliant. So we really crush out a lot of blind alleys by doing that approach.
And I think that is the most important part, too. I agree with you of the 3x3x3 concept is making all three of those operations work together to move it forward. Approximately about 20% of the 48 chiefs reports that were authorized in the 2007 WRDA received federal funds for construction. Of those not funded, if Congress were to authorize a public-private partnership, which we've put a pilot in, how many of those chiefs reports, those 48, would you say would have moved forward by now if the public-private partnership were expanded?
I guess we'd have to know the specifics of the authorizing legislation. Each project would have to attract private investment based on its own merits. And frankly, sir, I haven't done an analysis where I could tell you how that works. I would say that the deepening in Miami Harbor is an indicator that which is being done with contributed funds, right, advanced funds, is an indicator that there are projects out there that there's great interest in funding with or without federal investments, and so there's no doubt in my mind that some of them would go forward. It would just depend on the specifics of the legislation and the specifics of the attractiveness
Right.
of the various projects to investors.
Well, you mentioned the Port of Miami. What about the Port of Savannah, too? I understand that Georgia is lined up their money. They're ready to move, and there's been some concern by the governor of Georgia that the Corps is not on the same page. But I believe this legislation will allow Savannah to move forward with their own money.
Sir, I think you're aware that Savannah is one of those legacy projects that we spent years on, and I think in excess of $40 million studying. The biggest challenge with Savannah was that it's basically co-located with a national park and some pretty sensitive environmental habitat, and so working through that, was part of the challenge. The Corps fully shares all the stakeholders' desires to get that project underway, but right now we're waiting on a authorization from the Congress,
Right.
which is the administration has deemed as needed before we can move forward to
Which we hope to have
federal
that to you
dollars.
in short order.
Yes, sir.
Because, again, I know that the folks in Georgia, the governor, have all been, it's been an extremely important project. As the governor's home, I think they have $230 or $240 million ready to go as soon as we get that authorization out there. So I thank you and yield back.
Ms. Napolitano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I associate myself with the remarks of my predecessors about the Army Corps' work. We're very happy with our group in the LA area. The Los Angeles River Chiefs report is currently being worked on and will be finalized this year, of course. And we have advocated, several of my colleagues, on the Los Angeles River inclusion in the WRDA, but I realize this may not happen. I'd like to submit a letter, Mr. Chairman, for the record from the Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti, a city of over 4 million people, urging the committee to support the locally preferred alternative to the Los Angeles River.
It's ordered.
Thank you. The locally preferred alternative provides the most robust ecosystem restoration outcomes while also providing 4 times more jobs than the other alternatives, and will thereby be most appropriately redress historic environmental injustices that have resulted from the river's channelization, providing new public access to natural open spaces, improving public health, stimulating regional and local economies, and enhancing the life of quality, not only for the city of Los Angeles, for the whole county and the whole area of Los Angeles. This locally preferred alternative includes both significant restoration of the Los Angeles River confluence with the Verdugo Wash near the city's border with the city of Glendale, and the only substantial western bank connection, providing a profound hydrological link between the Los Angeles Historic Park and the river. I believe the LA River's Chiefs report is being reviewed, and I would hope that I'd like to receive, and this committee may receive, an update of where it stands.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much for the question, Congresswoman. I was actually out there in January and spent a considerable amount of time with the Los Angeles District and the South Pacific Division reviewing the project. We did an extensive overflight. I've got a great appreciation for its importance. The current status is just a couple of weeks ago, the mayor of Los Angeles, Mayor Garcetti, provided the district with a letter of support, which is great, but he put some language in that letter of support that is unusual, and so we have to kind of work through that. For example, he asked for a cost share provision that is outside of normal statutory provisions. So we are in consultations right now analyzing that, ma'am, and we're determining how we can continue to work with the mayor and the local sponsors to move forward. Once we've resolved that, then we'll be able to soon thereafter move to a Civil Works Review Board, which is the last major checkpoint en route to a Chiefs report. Generally, after a Civil Works Review Board is executed and votes to proceed forward with state and agency review, then it takes usually about 3 months from that point to the time that General Bostic would sign the Chiefs report.
Would you elaborate a little bit more on the issue with the cost share? Because I'm not aware of it.
I don't recall the specific language, but the mayor suggested that the cost share for Alternative 20 would be higher than what the federal government would normally cost share. Normally, the way it works is we cost share in accordance with the statutory provision associated with that particular project. In this case, as I recall, it's 65-35, which is what is the case for most projects. Because the federal government recommendation is alternative 13, the mayor wants to use alternative 20, which is the alternative you discussed. Normally, we would require that the cost share for the amount above the federal recommendation would be at 100% handled by the local sponsor. That's not what the mayor has suggested. So we're going through an internal process to analyze that and understand what we might be able to address to address the mayor's recommendation.
Thank you, General. And anything we can do to help, I'd really appreciate being made aware of it so we can work with you from this angle.
Yes, ma'am.
And I certainly am very pleased about the way the chief's reports are coming forth and letting us know what they are so that we are aware and can approve of moving them forward. So with that, I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so very much.
Thank you. Mr. Farringold.
Thank you very much, General. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all you do for the infrastructure in this country and otherwise. One of the consistent complaints that I hear from businesses and even governmental entities around the country is, give us some rules and we'll do our best to comply with them. Don't change the rules in the middle of the game. I'm co-chairman of the Texas Maritime Conference, used to represent Brownsville, Texas until redistricting, and still actively involved in all the ports along the Texas coast. And it was kind of disturbing to hear from Brownsville that it looks like the Corps is moving the goalposts on Brownsville. Let me give you a little bit of background. The Port of Brownsville is working on the Brazos Island Harbor project, which is basically a widening and deepening project that's been going on now for about 7 years. I'm a frequent visitor to the Port of Brownsville back when I represented it and after. It's, one of the poorest and most underdeveloped areas of our country there at the U.S.-Mexico border. And this deepening project will be hugely beneficial. It looks like the cost-benefit ratio on that exceeds 6 to 1. And it's my understanding that there's a very clean draft chief's report, and it's tracking to be final in September of 2014. But we recently found out that the Corps unilaterally decided to not go by the management protocol agreement between the National Marine Fisheries Service and the Corps. This is an agreement from December 29th of 2006, and the Corps is changing how they're interpreting that, and it looks like they're getting a potential biological problem. The port tells me they've worked hard with the Corps on these and other environmental issues over the past. Specifically, the green turtle is an example where Brownsville has worked very well together with the Corps for many years. I guess my question is, why are we shifting the rules now? Are you aware of that, and is there a reason we're doing that?
Congressman, the first I became aware of this issue was this morning, so unfortunately I am not familiar with the details. However, I'm going to follow up immediately following this this hearing and check with the Southwestern Division. I am familiar with the project.
Right.
In fact, we had hoped to have a Civil Works Review Board already before now. A few months ago, there were some delays. In fact, I asked General Kula, the Southwestern Division commander, to do a detailed root cause analysis of the reasons for the delays from the project. He has done that, and that information we are using to contribute to the current analysis that we're doing to potentially make adjustments to some of the specifics on how we execute planning modernization.
And I understand.
I'm going to have to follow up with you, sir, to get to your concerns.
And I would appreciate that. I guess there's a delicate balance to strike. If we want to streamline things and do our job better, faster, and more efficiently, we sometimes have got to change the way we do things. But when we change the way we do things, if we move the goalposts as part of that, that runs up the cost for everything. And obviously, there's a cost associated with going through all of the process, both for the Corps and for whatever entity, be it a public entity or whomever it's trying to deal with the Corps. And obviously, costs go up as the delays go down. I think if you look at what this committee has been trying to do, whether it's MAP 21 with highways or what we passed out in WRDA, we want to protect the environment. We want to do things safely. We want to get the job done, but we don't want to have unnecessary delay. There's cost involved in that. And so, my request to you is that you keep that in mind in all that you're doing, not just the Port of Brownsville. And my final question will be, what can we do to help you get your job done in a better and faster manner?
That's a great question, sir. There's been great collaboration and engagement with the Congress on what we're doing. I think the most important thing is to work closely with us to understand what it is that we are doing, to understand what the successes are, and understand, why sometimes things don't go as people would like. We do need a little tactical patience. The effort we're undergoing is going to take months and years to determine how well things are working. And so just continued engagement, I think, would be the most important thing, Congressman.
Again, thank you. I see my time has expired, so I'll yield back.
Ms. Fairholdt?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I also want to welcome Daishaya Fair, 8th grader from Northern Middle in Maryland. Thank you for being here as part of Girls Inc. Welcome. And welcome to our guests here today. Thank you for your service. Appreciate it. I want to say what I'm going to say, tell you with the utmost respect, but I am coming from representing a delegation of members from South Florida who basically are pulling their hair out right now in a dither. I'm saying that respectfully. And the reason for that, and I don't want to necessarily fault the Army Corps, because, you look in the mirror and we are the enemy, the Congress, because I believe we've given much authority to the executive in deciding which projects are actually going to end up getting authorized, since our bill, which is bipartisan, went in the direction of authorizing chief's reports. And for me, I think that gives much too much power to the executive and really removes a lot of transparency that I think the public expects and deserves. And I want to focus on 3 projects in South Florida just by example. The first is Port of Palm Beach in Palm Beach County. The second is Port Everglades in Fort Lauderdale. And then we have the Central Everglades planning project in Florida. Disappointed would be the minimal word I could use to express the fact that the chief's reports for Port Everglades and for SEP will not be completed in time for this next authorization. We've waited 18 years for a chief's report in Port Everglades, and I'll defer to Mr. Webster, and he'll tell you the history of SEP, because he worked on it when he was Speaker of the House in Florida. And what I want to say is not only are these projects very, very important for the economy of Florida, and of course SEP is very important not only for the economy but for our environment and our water resources, but both these projects have overwhelming popular support in the community and commitments for funding from the community. Port of Palm Beach, which I have, it's a split in our community in terms of support. There are some who are very much in support of it. The dredging, there's an expansion. There's some very vocal opposition, and there is, from what I know, no commitment for any matching funds from the community. And yet, of these 3 projects, the only project that we have a chief's report for is the one Port of Palm Beach, which is no commitment for funding from the community. So, my question really is do you take into account the either the community support of a project? Do you take into account the ability of a community to come forward and pay its share? And how does it matter to you at all what members of Congress communicate in regards to their what their stakeholders are thinking?
Ma'am, thank you for those questions. I'm familiar with all of these projects. I'm more familiar with SEP and Port Everglades than Palm Beach. Let me take your last question first. Congresswoman, absolutely, and we take very seriously the concerns of Congress. I mean, you are your elected constituents, representatives. You are more closely tied to them than we are, and so we do listen very closely. I think there's some misunderstandings associated with some of the concerns that have been expressed, and let me just kind of work my way through the two that I'm most familiar with. I'm not as familiar with Palm Beach. But to answer your other question about community support, there's two things that are required before I go to the specifics. The first is, before we can proceed with the feasibility study, we need a letter of support, an identified, viable, non-federal sponsor. Sometimes that non-federal sponsors, their ability to support a project changes over the course of the study, but for the most times that does not happen. The second thing we need is to proceed forward at later stages in the study is a federal cost-sharing agreement with the sponsor. And we would not get to a Civil Works Review Board if we didn't have gone through that process. With regard to the Central Everglades, we are very close. I have committed at the Civil Works Review Board that was held last week that we would have a continuation of our Civil Works Review Board not later than the end of June. So that we're just basically less than 2 months away from continuing the Civil Works Review Board. Once we continue the Civil Works Review Board, we will then move forward to state and agency review. Within about 3 months, we can expect a chief's report. So the project briefing done by the district was phenomenal, explained very clearly, an extremely complicated project, one of the most complicated projects that we've seen. But the truth is that there were some documentation issues that had to be addressed, and we really held the Civil Works Review Board before our review team had been able to complete their review. With regard to Port Everglades, you know, one of the I think frustrations that people sense, as was discussed earlier, the sense that we were moving goalposts. What generally happens when that perception is out there is the assumptions that we were planning on turn out not to be valid. And so when those assumptions change and are no longer valid, then we have to go back and address the new reality that confronts us, that does result in additional time, often results in additional costs, often results in changed requirements in order to get the study forward. And essentially that's what happened with the Port Everglades project.
Well, I thank you for your answer. Not that I'm happy with it, but, Mr. Chair, I will yield my time. I hope Mr. Webster will follow up on some of that.
Okay, thank you, General Peel, for that long explanation. I can recognize Chairman Emeritus, Mr. Young from Alaska.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, I really want to ask a couple short questions on the Brownsville Harbor. You just told the gentleman Faircloth that you didn't really know anything about it, and that disturbs me because this is a project that came under my chairmanship. And I believe it's gone through more first than anything else. You changed it from a legacy project to a smart project to I don't know how many different projects. You've had different managers, district managers, 3, 4 of them, I believe. And this is a legacy project. Now, what is the problem, and why is it happening, and why are we being delayed, and why isn't it finished?
Apologize, Chairman. Sir, I expect that is going to be, the Civil Works Review Board for that will be executed this summer. I'm very familiar with the project. What I was not familiar with, to clarify, was that the specific issue related to an endangered species. That was the first time that I had heard that was this morning, and so I just need time to follow up on it with the
okay,
local
I want to make a suggestion. First, you know, I'm a very big supporter of the Corps, and I am a little frustrated. and frankly, a little pissed off. I'll say that out loud again, pissed off, because now you're being dictated by the Fish and Wildlife, endangered species, et cetera, and nothing gets done. And those, I see this projects all across the United States, and it's inappropriate. I want you to take a firm stand against an agency, and I just had it happen up in Alaska. The EPA was going to veto a project prior to you applying for a permit. There has to be a little bit of more, say, this is our job. And you show me where the law is wrong, then we'll try to change the law. But this project started when I was chairman, Brownsville. It is a depressed area. It is a good project. We need that with the Panexes coming in. And now we find out there's now a new system. Why that's occurred, I don't know. Where did it come from? Who instigated it? Why was it a legacy project? And now we have to go through, numerous other firsts. Don't do that. So you are going to get back to me in this committee, and we're going to find out why we can't expedite that process, get this done this summer. I don't want to come back here next year and chew on you again if you're still in that position, because it's inappropriate.
Yes, sir.
You have a responsibility. Would you like to respond, please?
Sir, as I said earlier, I'm absolutely committed to looking into this as quickly as possible and getting back to you and the committee as quickly as possible on what's going on. And I still expect that we'll be able to move forward with the Civil Works Review Board later this summer.
Okay, and don't, like I say, keep us informed, keep this committee informed about where the process, if there's a stalemate, if someone else is getting their finger in the pie, because I want this project done.
I will keep you up to speed.
But gentlemen, yield.
You got gladly yield.
Gentlemen, I just want to, while we're talking about Brownsville, and I've been to Brownsville. I know what's going on down there. There's billions of dollars worth of investment that this thing needs to move forward. Again, everybody in this room wants to make sure the environment is sound, but to slow it up again is the wrong thing to do. So I echo Chairman Young's comments. We want to find out what's going on, keep us informed, but this project really needs to move, because there's billions of private dollars that's going to go into that port, and it's going to help an area of the country that has seen some tough economic times. So again, we're going to be on this one. So I appreciate that. And the other thing is, I don't know the gentlelady from Florida, if she asked, if I missed it, the Port of Everglades, which I've said to her, we're going to go through this process, and when do you expect the Port of Everglades to have a chief's report, roughly?
Go ahead. Yeah, Tab, go ahead.
Sir, we're looking at it. Bottom line is right now we're pretty close in terms of finalizing the issue with the biological opinion. After that, we believe that we can finalize the recommended plan and then move forward and finalizing the report.
We're looking at months, not years?
We're talking about months, yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Because again, we want to. We're going to move this next, as I've committed to the gentlelady from Florida. When we get done with this bill, we're going to start working on another bill, because I know how important it is to Florida. And I can assure you, Don Young will be looking over your shoulder in Brownsville. She'll be looking over your shoulder in the Port of Everglades, or she'll be looking over mine too. So I want to make sure we make that, we move that, keep that moving forward. So again, thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Kirkpatrick.
Mr. Chairman, General Peabody, there's a project in my district that is unlike any other in the country, because it seeks to protect a community of people whom, not so long ago, Congress moved into a 100-year floodplain. The federal government has relocated over 100 Navajo and Hopi families from tribal lands to Winslow, Arizona, pursuant to laws Congress passed in 1974 and 1980. Not only do we have a statutory responsibility for these families, but Congress and the Army Corps of Engineers share a trust obligation for the safety of American Indians. The Little Colorado River at Winslow Levee feasibility study will have its chief's report by next August, and I just want to thank you, General, for committing to do that. And I thank the Chairman for his commitment to begin writing the next WRDA bill as soon as we finish passing this one, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Okay. Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to follow up with the Central Everglades Planning Project. Back when we first started, which was, Ms. Frankel and I were both in the Florida legislature. That was, we passed a Everglades Restoration Act many years ago. And we were used to having a 50-50 commitment with the federal government, but us funding most of it. And we didn't see money for many years after that. We spent hundreds of millions of dollars. But in every case, we needed approval. Even though the federal dollars weren't coming, we still needed to have approval. Is there a specific date that the board will the Civil Works Review Board will reconvene? I mean, is it so they can move forward with this?
Congressman, we have not scheduled a specific date. I will receive an in-progress review report from our policy reviewers this Friday, and within the next 10 days to 2 weeks after that, I expect to have a clear understanding if any issues remain to be resolved. If there are no issues remaining to be resolved, then I expect we can schedule a Civil Works Review Board, or I should say continue the Civil Works Review Board at that time. So the best case scenario, I think, is the end of next month, the end of May. The worst case scenario is the end of June. And so I'm absolutely committed that not later than the end of June, we will continue the Civil Works Review Board. We will and when we convene that, I will only do it because I'm confident that we'll be able to get to a positive vote and then submit the report for state and agency review.
May sounds really, really good. A lot better than June. Also, can I ask a question about the Jacksonville Harbor? The chief's report was signed earlier this month, and now it's been submitted to the Secretary of the Army. Is there a project sort of update on what's going to happen with that chief's report and the timeline?
Sir, the chief's report, once it's signed, goes two places. First, it comes to the Congress, but then it goes to Secretary Darcy's office for administration review between her office and the Office of Management and Budget. And, you know, they do their review, and once it gets to administration review, then the administration would submit it back to Congress with any independent recommendations that the administration may have separate from the chief. By statute, the chief is required to separate, you know, to give his recommendation, and then the secretary has an equal obligation to make her own independent judgment.
Is there any kind of timeline for that?
Sir, I'm not familiar with where that particular project is in administration review right now.
Okay, yield back.
Mr. Rice.
General, I've heard reports. I obviously wasn't here when we started working on the Port Everglades project, but that it started in the 90s. Is that correct?
Tab, do you have the timeline?
The head of the Florida Port System told me they've been working on trying to get this port dredged since 1998. Is that right?
It's been about 17 years, sir.
You work for the Army, and you do a great job, and I appreciate your service. But it's very appropriate because I think we're in a war. This isn't the Armed Services Committee. We're in an economic war with the rest of the world, and who we're fighting for is that young lady right over there, that Girl Scout, and we're fighting for. You got kids?
I have a 4-year-old. Yes, sir.
Yeah, we're fighting for them. We're fighting for American competitiveness, economic competitiveness, and I think on a fair playing field, nobody can beat us. But I think we're defeating ourselves. We're strangling ourselves with all this regulation and delay. The fact that we could ever dream of taking 16 years to approve dredging a port. Hadn't that port been dredged before?
Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah, that it would take that long to make decisions about feasibility and environmental conditions on a port that's been dredged before that's not going to require any federal money. I mean, the system is so very, very clearly broken. And, I mean, we can sit here and name a whole lot of reasons why this has happened, but it should never happen again. How long have we been working on Brownsville?
I don't have the timeline on that, sir. But so I would like to say that, you know, your point is exactly right. I mean, this is exactly why we instituted planning modernization, so that we could come to clear decisions on relatively predictable timelines, so that all the benefits that can accrue from these water resource projects can start, because we can't get to construction until we do our job.
And I appreciate the concept of 333. I think 333 is too long. If we're going to compete, there are groups of people around the world, in every country, every organized country, except for us, that sit around and try to figure out how they can make their countries more competitive, how they can cut regulations, streamline cost, or reduce cost, and make things more efficient. And we've got to change our attitude. We've got to recognize that we're in an economic battle here, or we're going to continue to see jobs. And when that young lady right there graduates from college, and your daughter does, and my sons just did, there's not going to be anything for them. There's going to have to be a dramatic change in our attitude if we're going to compete in the world.
Sir, I strongly concur with your concerns about the economic competitiveness of this nation. I am doing everything I can to move things forward in the Corps of Engineers Civil Works program to get to decisions so that we can remain competitive.
I mean, very honestly, particularly on a port that's been dredged, multiple times. Let's talk about Charleston for a minute. Not that Charleston's taken a tremendous amount of time. Charleston's one that I'm roughly familiar with. I don't know how many times Charleston's been dredged, but it's been dredged pretty darn continuously for decades. Charleston is an incredibly economically important port. I can't imagine a scenario, just common sense, that you would run your study on Charleston on what it takes to get it to the Panamax depth, and that you would conclude that port doesn't need to be dredged. I cannot imagine that scenario. And why it would take years to make that decision is just, it defies common sense in my opinion, and it makes us less competitive. We need to create a future for our kids. We need to figure out a way to get past this. So thank you for two things I'd like to see from you. One, I want your suggestions, because I don't know. I want your suggestions on what we can do to make this dramatically different, particularly for ports that have been dredged over and over again and are so clearly important to our national economic security. And two, I want to know how much money we're spending doing these studies, for example, Port Everglades, versus what it actually costs to dredge. I want to know what the percentage is difference. Because I think we're spending an incredibly inordinate amount of money and time, and I'd like for that to take into account opportunity costs that we've lost.
In terms of the amount of money, let's talk about Savannah Harbor, which I'm more familiar with. First of all, Charleston Harbor is on track for currently a chief's report next year in 2015. And I just got an update on that last week, and it's where it needs to be, barring any unforeseen circumstances, which sometimes do arise. But the Savannah Harbor expansion project, for example, that took, I think, at least 15 years, over $40 million to study that project. General Semonite, I happened to sit on that Civil Works Review Board in a previous capacity. General Semonite, then the division commander, had a very graphic visual that showed 27 inches across binders documenting all the issues associated with the project. But, sir, quite frankly, I mean, we have to comply with all of the statutes, policies, and regulations that we're obligated to follow. And in this particular case, because of the confluence of the harbor with some sensitive environmental habitat, it really made the project much more complex to plow through.
Well, what I'd like to know is how we can streamline that 27 inches of binder or the statutes that you have to comply with. What I want to know is what we've got to get rid of or simplify.
So within our current legal policy and regulatory constraints, we believe platting modernization does exactly that. And all the early indicators are that it is working and it will deliver what we think it is supposed to.
I hear you, and I appreciate that, and I think you're doing a great job. I really do, and I know you understand my concern. But yes, I don't want you to start the sentence within our current. I want to talk about what we can change within that to redefine those boundaries and make this easier.
So that's for people who don't wear a uniform to.
But I understand, but we're not. We need your insight because y'all work with it every day. We need your insight on what we need to change.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Jolly?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, I just want to echo the concerns of my colleagues from Florida on both sides of the aisle about Central Everglades. Express my urgency and disappointment on that as well. The President has suggested it's a priority of his through his We Can't Wait initiative. So I appreciate that you've demonstrated an understanding as to the urgency of it. The only thing I would ask as a courtesy, you mentioned you're receiving a progress report this Friday, and you think within 2 weeks you'd be able to schedule a review board. Could your office commit to updating at least those of us from Florida on this subcommittee? That puts it around May 15th, I would estimate, 2 weeks out from this Friday. Could you commit to updating us by then on a date that you could convene that board?
Sir, we will absolutely keep you and the other members of the delegation updated on the progress of moving forward.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Frankel, did you have a follow-up question? You're fine? Okay. I just got a couple things. First of all, General, I want to thank you for all your work and attentiveness on the Cleveland Harbor dredging project for this year, getting that done, and your commitment to work with the Ohio EPA to find a solution in the future for starting next year, really, and how important that is to the economy of northern Ohio, and at least 2,000 jobs in the Cleveland area were at risk. And so it's good to know that the dredging is going to proceed on schedule this coming May, this next month coming up. I asked you a question, and I wasn't going to ask you, but I thought maybe I'll ask you publicly because I think it's important. We've had hearings on it in the past. You know, in the Missouri River issue, that we had 1 year we had flooding, and then the next year, I think I got the word right, we had drought. And can you just kind of give us an update of what the status is right now and what the Corps is looking at on that whole Missouri River Basin issue?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, sir. We just last week did our annual spring flood assessment. We do this every year across the Corps, look at all the basins so that we can make sure that we understand the status of snowpack, of ground moisture, of meteorological forecasts, and then anticipate and pre-position assets if needed to address the potential for flooding. We did have the flood of record in the recorded history of the Missouri River in 2011, as you indicated, and then we had a near-record drought just the next year. This year, we do have a fairly significant snowpack. In some, I think, spot locations, it is a record or close to a record in the upper reaches of the Missouri River Basin, mostly in, I think, Montana area. So we're a little bit concerned about the snowpack, but we don't currently have any meteorological forecast that would cause us to believe that we would have this almost unique confluence of very heavy snowpack and record rainfalls like we had in 2011. The other thing is the reservoirs are still lower than normal in the Missouri River Basin, so we have more storage capacity than we might normally have to deal with additional runoff from either snow or rain. So while we're certainly not out of the woods, we won't know that until well into June. Right now, we feel like we're in a good position, and we don't anticipate major flooding, although, of course, that could always change with the weather.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So because the reservoirs are down a little bit, if we do get a large rain event like we did in 2011, we get some capacity there yet to prevent flooding. And then we also got I know that the challenge is balancing that in case we don't get the rainfall, and we won't know that, of course, later, like you said, late this spring, early midsummer. So I appreciate that. Mr. Dunham made it back in, so we'll go ahead, Mr. Dunham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Major General Peabody, thank you for joining us. This is certainly a good day for a lot of us that have been waiting for quite some time to get a number of these chiefs' reports completed. As you may know, you and your colleagues have worked for quite some time on the flood risk management project along Orostimba Creek in Stanislaus County. It's part of the San Joaquin Basin near Newman. Major General Walsh was before this committee last June, and I appreciated hearing his comment on the Corps' continued commitment on the project. I was also very pleased when the Corps submitted last September the final report from the Chief of Engineers, whereby you recommend authorization of a plan for flood risk management by constructing a levee there at the city of Newman, the northeast perimeter there. The city and the county are both local partners, and this project has been in the works for nearly 2 decades. So we're finally excited that this is actually getting done. But I did want to ask, given all the reforms, how do you think the Corps' new 3x3x3 would have affected this project? And additionally, if you can get this project funded by Congress, what is the Corps' estimate on delivery date, and do you anticipate any issues in completing construction?
Congressman, thank you, sir, for the question. I am not familiar with that project, so I would have to look at it to be able to answer your question with any precision. I will say that I'm very confident that our planning modernization approach is working, and the 3x3x3 model works best when we have a fairly localized project that has a very direct purpose. It doesn't have a lot of complicating variables, a committed sponsor able to fund their cost share provision. Basically, it's a well-bounded and well-defined project. Now, I will say that, to add on one other point that I think is very important, in the past, we did not bound ourselves. We allowed ourselves to infinitely, almost infinitely, look at all kinds of alternatives and get overzealous about studying the full range of possibilities. What we've done with 3x3x3 is discipline ourselves early on to scope down the project to the most likely set of alternatives and range of approaches that are going to address the issue and have a high possibility of success in addressing the issue. And doing that early up front makes the critical difference in being able to cut out these years and years and years of study.
Thank you. This certainly from a local perspective, but I would even say my colleagues here in D.C., at Oristimba Creek, which most people would have never heard of, have heard a lot about it because it's taken so long. And so we're looking forward not only to a new and changed process that will expedite a number of these projects, but certainly having this included in the Chief's reports with the rest of the WARDA package is something that's going to be very well received at home. So thank you.
Mr. Sanford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General. Nice to see you, sir. A quick update from my end down along the coast of South Carolina. Of all things, in the Post and Courier, which is the main paper oldest paper in the United States, I believe, and the main paper there in Charleston and surrounding areas, had an op-ed, an editorial of all things today. I'll read just a portion of it, just to bring you up to speed from our end, and would love your thoughts. Six mayors along the Charleston County coast have launched an effort to get the cited intercoastal waterway fixed. Theirs is a commendable emergency measure to restore marine traffic, both commercial and recreational, in the key north-south artery. They hope to convince Charleston County Council to use accommodation tax and transportation sales revenues to dredge the most troubled areas near McClellanville and the Isle of Palms near Breach Inlet. They hope the state will find long-term ways to keep this vital waterway open, but the state's congressional delegation needs to put the most muscle into solving the problem. Keeping the intercoastal waterway operations is a responsibility of the federal government, just as it's the federal government's responsibility to keep the interstate highways operational. Of the Atlantic states, South Carolina ranks last in federal funding for waterway dredging. Indeed, it has not happened at all in the past year, according to an article from reporter Prentice Friendly. Our congressmen have made concerted efforts to obtain money for Charleston Harbor. They should be working to fund the waterway as well. Meanwhile, County Councilman Dickie Schweers, who's on my call list for today, has pointed out a number of shrimp boats are being trapped near McClellanville. They can't get in or out. And barges that run north and south on the intercoastal waterway can only apply their trade during high tides in some cases. So I guess my question is quick update on the intercoastal waterway and what is scheduled next and what might be scheduled next from a funding standpoint.
Thank you for that question, Congressman. Sir, I'm not familiar with this specific project, but I'll dig into it. There's 2 points, well, maybe 3 points I'd like to make. First of all, it's gratifying to me to hear that there are local entities who are interested in contributing funds and ensuring that our waterway system works, which I believe is absolutely critical to the economic competitiveness of the nation. The second point I would make, and I think what is the larger point is, most people do not understand that this nation is blessed with the largest naturally navigable inland waterway system in the world, thanks to primarily, but not exclusively, the Mississippi River system, as well as the coastal waterway system that you're talking about. We have more miles of navigable waterway, 12,000 miles, than the entire rest of the world combined. And so the ability to move goods and people by waterborne transportation, which is the most environmentally compliant and the most economically competitive, is it's the cheapest way to move goods per ton mile, is one of the reasons why we can sustain our competitiveness despite our relatively high tax and labor rates. The last comment I would make is, sir, I think you're aware that because of the fiscal pressures that we in the Corps face as part of the larger federal government, that we continue to have to place, notwithstanding the importance of this larger system that I talked about, we have to place our limited funds on those projects that give the highest return. So as we go forward, the biggest challenge, or one of the biggest challenges that we face in the Corps is we're going to need to make tough decisions about what infrastructure to invest in and what not. We have two recon studies in the President's 15 budget proposal for Kentucky River and Upper Allegheny to dispose of those. There's a lock and dam on the Kentucky River that, believe it or not, went into operation during Martin Van Buren's administration. And there's no traffic that goes through there. So I'll get back to you on your issue, sir, but I think these larger points are important for us to understand and dialogue about.
Understand the larger points, appreciate it. And again, that's a proverbial food fight each year of the Congress,
yes, sir,
and how those funds get distributed. But I would just make the point from a competitive standpoint. The port in Charleston has been rated indeed one of the most competitive points in the entire country. And a feeder system feeding out from that port obviously would be the intercoastal waterway running both north and south. And so from a competitive standpoint and from a utility standpoint, there's something very wrong with barges only being able to operate at high tide, which is currently the case in areas both north and south. And so would very much appreciate you getting back to me on numbers in terms of where things stand. And there's something wrong if this statistic is true, and it's quoted in the newspaper, therefore it may not be true, but South Carolina being last in federal funding for waterway dredging, given the importance of Charleston.
Sir, I look forward to meeting with you to discuss those issues, and I will
Yes,
get
sir.
back to you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, sir.
Well, that concludes our hearing. General, I want to thank you for coming in, and hopefully we're close to finishing up the WRDA bill, and look forward we all look forward working with you as we implement the new policies that will come out of there to help streamline the cost. And I'd love to hear your comment you just made at the end there about our inland waterway system and the coastal waterway system. The numbers compared globally, that's interesting, and you're absolutely right. We've been blessed with a good system, and we just need to get it updated so we can remain competitive and move those exports out. So again, thank you for coming in, and this concludes our hearing for today.